So, have you had a chance to reflect, Chloe? Mark's voice was a slick mix of condescension and confidence, so thick I had to pull the phone away from my ear and just stare at it. It had been 3 days, exactly 3 days since my husband, the CEO of a company I'd poured my life into, had security escort me out of the building like some common criminal. And now, he was calling to ask if I'd had a chance to reflect? Before I continue, if you've ever been betrayed by the one person you thought you could trust more than anyone, you should think about subscribing. It's just a small click, but it helps us build a community for people who understand exactly what that feels like. I looked down at the fresh divorce papers spread out on my kitchen island, and then over at my laptop screen, which showed a detailed flowchart of $2.5 million in fraudulent transfers set up by his brother, Owen. I couldn't help but smile. As a matter of fact, Mark, I have. Why don't you come home from the office? I think it's about time we had a talk. There was a moment of silence on the other end. I could see him perfectly in my mind's eye, standing in his corner office, a glass cage, probably checking his reflection in the window, while Owen, his parasitic brother, stood nearby whispering more poison in his ear. "Good," he finally said. "I'll be there around 7. I hope you're ready to be rational." Rational. The word just hung there after I hung up. 3 days ago, I was the picture of rationality. 3 days ago, I walked into that conference room expecting a normal project update, maybe a discussion about the third quarter earnings or the big Hamilton Corp deal we were trying to land. What I got instead was my husband and his brother sitting next to each other like a two-man firing squad. But I should have noticed the warning signs. Over the last month, the ground had been slowly shifting under my feet, but I had foolishly ignored it. Mark had stopped including me on emails with investors, telling me I needed to be rational. He said I needed to let him focus on the big picture while I handled the numbers. Board meetings were suddenly relabeled as executive strategy sessions, which conveniently no longer required the CFO to be present. And Owen, my God, Owen, had become Mark's permanent shadow, even though he'd only joined the company 6 months ago with zero relevant experience other than writing vapid motivational quotes for his social media. I walked over to the huge kitchen window and stared out at the Denver skyline. From our 20th floor high-rise apartment, I had a perfect view of the Vanguard Dynamics Tower just 8 blocks away. 4 years ago, Mark and I had signed the lease on our first real office, a small cramped space on the 3rd floor of that very building. We lived on 18-hour days and cheap pizza we ate on the floor because we couldn't even afford desks yet. I handled every single invoice, balanced every book, and built every financial model from scratch, while Mark coded late into the night, creating the software that would eventually get us $15 million in venture capital. Our wedding photo was on the counter, taken just 5 years ago. We looked so impossibly young, completely convinced that our love and our business ambitions could coexist perfectly. Mark's arm was around my waist, and my head was resting on his shoulder. We were both grinning at something just off camera. It was probably my sister, Sophie, making some completely inappropriate joke to get us to relax. We had scribbled our vows on cocktail napkins from the hotel bar the night before the wedding, too busy and stressed to write them any sooner. His promised he would always trust my instincts. Mine promised I would always be his anchor. Winston, our big Bernese mountain dog, padded into the kitchen and gently rested his giant head on my knee. He had been doing that constantly for the past 3 days, his brown eyes filled with a worry he couldn't express. Dogs always know. I'd brought him home 2 years ago when Mark's work week started stretching to 100 hours. He'd said I needed the company. Looking back, I think I was already starting to feel the chill of loneliness. The apartment itself was like a museum of our success. The exposed brick wall still had the faint outlines of our first business plan, drawn in erasable marker. We'd refused to wipe it off even after we could afford a dozen whiteboards. The oversized designer couch Mark had insisted we buy with our first profit-sharing bonus. The granite kitchen island where we'd popped champagne to celebrate our Series A funding, raised glasses of expensive scotch for our first major contract, and ate greasy Chinese food from the same place that had fueled our all-nighters back in the early lean years. My phone buzzed. It was a text from my mom. "Still planning on you for dinner Sunday. Is Mark coming this time?" This was going to be the 5th Sunday in a row he'd canceled. The 4th time I'd have to invent an excuse. Mom always made her famous beef stew and would pack a huge container of leftovers for me to take home because she knew it was Mark's favorite. For the last month, I'd been bringing those containers home, lying that Mark was stuck in late meetings and eating the stew by myself. The last time I was there, 2 weeks ago, Mom watched me with that sharp gaze that had seen her 3 daughters through every kind of heartbreak. A marriage without open communication is like a company without positive cash flow, she'd said, slicing a loaf of sourdough with an expert hand. Both are headed for bankruptcy. I had laughed it off, but her words were a prophecy. The communication had broken down slowly and then all at once. First, Mark stopped asking for my opinion on new hires. Then he started having these quick syncs with Owen that would last for hours. The final straw came last week when I discovered those huge, unexplained consulting fees. $50,000 a month, paid out to shell companies I had never even heard of. He had completely waved off my concerns. "Owen is handling our vendor contracts now," he'd said, his eyes glued to his phone. "Just focus on your duties, Chloe." My duties? As if I were just some employee, not his wife. Not the woman who had poured her entire life savings into our company. Not the CFO who had single-handedly kept us from going under when our business account was down to its last $200. I opened my laptop again, the screen lighting up the damning evidence that Professor Alistair Finch, my old mentor from business school, had helped me put together. 18 months of calculated, systematic stealing, a network of shell companies with generic corporate names, Horizon Strategies, Pinnacle Group, Apex Innovations, every single one of them traced back to offshore accounts controlled by Owen. A total of $2.5 million had been siphoned off, all while Owen was whispering in Mark's ear that I was the one who couldn't be trusted. The irony was so cruel, it was almost beautiful. They had crucified me over 3 completely legitimate expense reports, while Owen was stealing enough money to buy a luxury condo in cash. And Mark had believed him, instantly. Without asking a single question, without a basic investigation, without even giving me the common decency of a chance to defend myself. The security footage Veronica's investigator had found was the final brutal piece of the puzzle. Owen, entering my locked office at 11 p.m., logging onto my computer and spending almost an hour tampering with my files. The timestamp was 2 days before my so-called performance review. 2 days before the ambush. I checked the clock. 5:30 p.m. An hour and a half until Mark walked through that door expecting to find me crying and begging for forgiveness. What he was going to find instead were divorce papers and the complete, undeniable truth of his brother's betrayal. The lesson I had learned was not the one he thought he was teaching me. Winston let out a soft whine, and I scratched him behind his floppy ears. "It's okay, boy," I whispered. "After tonight, everything changes." The doorbell rang at 6:45 p.m., 15 minutes early. Of course. Mark always had to be early, asserting his CEO-level punctuality even for his own day of judgment. I took a deep breath, smoothed the front of my dress, the navy blue one he had given me for our 3rd anniversary, and walked to the door. Winston followed me, his tail tucked low, sensing the tension in the air. Mark was on the other side, dressed in his tailored Zegna suit, the charcoal gray one that cost more than my first car. His face was a mask of generous authority, the exact look he put on after closing a 7-figure deal. He genuinely believed he was here to graciously accept my surrender. "Chloe," he said, striding past me into the apartment without waiting for an invitation. It was still half his after all. For now, Mark. He went straight to the living room, his eyes scanning the coffee table, where I had intentionally placed nothing but a vase of lilies. The divorce papers were hidden in a kitchen drawer. The laptop, with its treasure map of Owen's fraud, was closed and sitting innocently on the counter. Not yet. I would let him enjoy his imaginary victory for a little longer. "I'm glad you've had some time to process things," he said, sinking into his favorite armchair. The ridiculously expensive leather one he'd insisted on buying, even though it clashed with all our other furniture. "These last few days must have been difficult for you." Difficult. A bitter laugh almost escaped me. 3 days ago had been difficult. 3 days ago was the complete destruction of my world. 3 days ago looked something like this. It started on a Monday morning at 8:47 a.m. I was in the middle of reviewing the bi-weekly payroll, making sure everyone would be paid on time, despite the mysterious cash flow problems caused by Owen's phantom consultants. My tea was still hot, my dog was sleeping under my desk, and I was making a mental note to recommend a promotion for Sarah in accounting. She had been a total rock star. Then a notification popped up on my screen. Mandatory performance review, 9 a.m., 13 minutes notice. My husband, the man who slept next to me, who had kissed me goodbye that very morning, had scheduled a mandatory performance review with his own wife using the corporate calendar system. Not a phone call, not a quick walk to my office 30 feet down the hall, a cold, formal calendar invite. My hands were shaking as I clicked accept. What else could I do? Decline my own execution? I walked to the main conference room, my heart pounding in my chest, trying to come up with a logical reason. It had to be about the Hamilton Corp deal, or maybe a new investor had some questions. It could be anything but what my gut was screaming at me. But the second I pushed open the glass door and saw them, I knew. Mark sitting at the head of the long table, his usual throne, and Owen at his right hand, wearing a designer suit that probably cost more than Sarah's entire monthly salary. The smart glass windows had been switched to opaque, turning the room into a sterile, soundproof box. No audience, no witnesses, just the three of us and a single thin manila folder placed in the exact center of the reclaimed wood table I had personally picked out to reflect our company's supposed commitment to sustainability. Chloe. Mark's voice was completely empty of warmth. Not honey, not babe, not even Chloe, just Chloe. The way he would address any other employee. "Please, have a seat." Owen didn't even try to hide his smug look of satisfaction. He sat with his hands clasped, his flashy Ivy League ring glinting under the lights, looking like a vulture that had just found a fresh kill on the side of the road. "We have some serious concerns about your conduct," Mark continued, using that CEO tone he used to practice in the mirror when we were first starting out. We used to laugh about it back then. My conduct? I was truly confused. "Mark, what is this?" He slid the folder across the polished wood. The soft scraping sound it made is a sound I will never forget. Inside were copies of 3 of my recent expense reports. 3. A client dinner at a high-end steakhouse with the Henderson Group, a dinner Mark had explicitly told me to spare no expense on. The purchase of new accounting software, which he had approved in an email with the words, "Get whatever you need to make it happen," and the registration fee for a fintech conference in Austin, which he had personally asked me to go to because he had a scheduling conflict. These irregularities suggest a pattern of misusing company funds, Owen chimed in, leaning forward as if he were a prosecutor presenting undeniable DNA evidence. "We cannot have a CFO who engages in such questionable spending. Questionable spending. 3 legitimate pre-approved expenses that totaled less than $10,000, while his secret slush fund was draining $50,000 a month from the company. You can't be serious," I had said, my eyes darting between the two of them. "Mark, you personally approved every single one of these. The board has lost confidence in your ability to manage the company's finances," Mark said, his eyes avoiding mine as he read from a script. Owen's script, I would realize later. "What board?" I shot back. We have 3 board members, you, me, and Daniel Park. Are you telling me Daniel suddenly lost confidence in the CFO, who has kept this company profitable for 4 straight years? The decision is final, Mark had said, finally looking at me. And in that moment, I saw it. A complete void. No guilt, no conflict. Not even a flicker of recognition for the woman he was destroying. Just cold, detached corporate procedure. As if I hadn't been the one to hold his hand through every early failure, every server crash, every moment of self-doubt when he was ready to quit. Please clear out your desk, Owen added, already standing up, already finished with me. Security will escort you out. Security. 2 guards, Frank and a younger guy named Ben, were already standing outside the conference room door. They had known. The whole office had known. The walk to my office, my former office, was the longest 50 feet of my life. People I had hired, mentored, and supported were suddenly fascinated by their spreadsheets. Only Brenda, the receptionist, had tears in her eyes, the only sign of humanity in that entire building. I packed 4 years of my life into a cardboard box while Owen stood in the doorway watching me. My Financial Leadership Woman of the Year award? I left it on the desk, angled so he would have to look at it every day. The framed photo of Winston, that went in the box. The $sign-shaped stress ball Mark had given me as a joke after we landed our first big contract. I dropped it into the trash can, making eye contact with Owen as I did. This is a mistake, I had told him, my voice a low whisper, as Frank led me past the kitchen I'd stocked, the quiet room I'd fought for, the wall of press clippings I'd helped earn. The only mistake, Owen had replied, his voice loud enough for half the office to hear, was allowing nepotism to compromise our leadership. Nepotism. The brother-in-law, who was handed a senior executive job with 0 qualifications, was lecturing me on nepotism. Now, 3 days later, Mark was sitting in our living room waiting for my apology. "Can I get you some coffee?" I asked, walking toward the kitchen. "I just bought a new bag of that Ethiopian blend you like." "That would be great," he said, and for a split second his voice softened. "You always did make the best coffee." I started the machine, the familiar whirring and gurgling sounds filling the tense silence. I opened the drawer where the divorce papers were waiting. Not yet. First, he could have one last cup of his favorite coffee in this apartment. Let him get comfortable in that throne of a chair. Let him believe he had won. The coffee maker beeped, signaling it was ready. I poured the Ethiopian blend into his favorite mug, the oversized one we bought on our honeymoon in Italy, and carried it over to him. My hands, I noticed, were perfectly steady. He took it without looking up from his phone, probably scrolling through company dashboards, or more likely, texting Owen a play-by-play of how well his little intervention was going. "Thanks," he said, distracted. Then, remembering his role, he added, "We need to talk about your future." My future. I walked back to the kitchen, my knuckles turning white as I gripped the edge of the counter, the memory of the past 72 hours washing over me. That first day, after the ambush, the shock didn't really sink in until I got home. Frank, the security guard, had helped me load the box of my professional life into the trunk of my car, his face a picture of unspoken sympathy. I had driven the 8 blocks back to our apartment on pure autopilot, carried the box inside, and just stopped. I stood there in the entryway, still in my work clothes, holding 4 years of my life in a flimsy box that once held printer paper. Winston found me there an hour later, whining and nudging my hand with his cold, wet nose. I sank onto the designer sofa, the one Mark had insisted was crucial for serious client meetings, and I didn't move. Still in my blazer, still in my heels, just replaying the moment my husband had looked at me like I was a complete stranger. The apartment felt foreign that day, a hostile environment. Every object was a monument to a life that was no longer mine. The industry awards on the mantel, the mortgage papers held to the fridge by a magnet with our names, side by side. The ridiculous photo from a company holiday party where Mark was wearing a Santa hat and I was dressed as his CFO elf. Around 2 a.m., so, with Winston's heavy body pressed against me, I pulled out our wedding album, page after page of broken promises. Mark's handwritten vows were tucked into the back cover. Chloe, you are not just my wife. You are my partner in everything. Every challenge, every success, every dream, we face them together. Together. The word was a cruel joke staring up at me from the page. When exactly had together become you're fired? The second day, Tuesday, the grief started to curdle. It hardened into a cold, diamond-sharp anger that felt like a jolt of pure electricity. I had woken up at 5 a.m., still on the couch, Winston's worried face just inches from mine. My phone showed 19 missed calls from my mom, 5 from my sister Sophie, and a deafening silence from Mark. That's when I started making my own calls. Professor Alistair Finch answered on the second ring, despite the early hour. Chloe, it's been ages. How is the corporate world treating you? My husband just fired me from the company we founded, I said, my voice surprisingly steady, and I'm pretty sure his brother has been embezzling from us. There was a short, sharp pause. Send me everything. Every ledger, every transfer, every email. When the student becomes the master, they'd better have their lesson plan ready. Veronica Croft was next. She was a legend, a referral from Sophie's friend who had just gone through a brutal divorce. Veronica's voicemail greeting was, Croft Law. We professionally dismantle the deserving. I need a lawyer who isn't afraid of a fight with a tech CEO, I'd said. Honey, I eat tech CEOs for breakfast, she'd replied when she called back. How quickly can you be in my office? The third call was to Sarah Jenkins, a reporter whose business card had been sitting in my desk drawer. She'd been working on a long-form piece about toxic workplaces in Denver's tech sector and had asked for an interview, which I had politely declined months ago. Ms. Jenkins, this is Chloe Maxwell. About that interview you requested? I'm available. What changed? She'd asked, her journalistic senses immediately on high alert. Everything. By Tuesday afternoon, Professor Finch had already found the trail. Chloe, these consulting payments, they're all being funneled to newly formed LLCS. This is textbook fraud. Veronica was just as blunt. He fired you without a documented cause, without a formal board vote. Oh, this is going to be magnificent. We're not just going to divorce him, we're going to give him a corporate cremation. But it was Tuesday night when the universe handed me a gift. Sophie sent me a text. You need to see Owen's latest social media post. And there it was. Owen sitting at my desk in my chair with my view of the Rocky Mountains, posting a smug essay on the necessity of cutting out toxic elements from leadership and making the tough calls for the health of the business. He was grinning in the photo like he'd just won the Powerball, which given the fraudulent invoices, he basically had. The comment section, however, had turned into a war zone. Sarah from accounting had written, an interesting take from the guy who took credit for my Q2 financial model. A developer named Mike commented, toxic. Chloe was the only exec who ever bothered to learn our names. Even Brenda, the sweet receptionist, had chimed in. Some people know the price of everything and the value of nothing. But the best one came from a programmer Owen had fired 2 months prior. Is this the same guy who tried to expense his girlfriend's trip to a spa retreat as a team-building exercise? The toxicity is coming from inside the house. I screenshotted every single comment. My phone was buzzing nonstop as more employees, both current and former, piled on with their own stories. Veronica would have a field day. Sarah Jenkins would win a Pulitzer. By Wednesday night, I had my ammunition. The divorce papers Veronica had drafted were a work of art in their brutal efficiency. Irreconcilable differences, equitable asset distribution, and a carefully worded clause about breach of fiduciary duty that was about to become very important. Professor Finch's forensic report was a masterclass in damning evidence. $2.5 million siphoned over 18 months through 3 shell companies, all linked to bank accounts Owen had opened. Sarah Jenkins' draft article was an expose, weaving together a dozen testimonials about Vanguard Dynamics' culture of fear and nepotism. I was reviewing it all at my kitchen island when Mark had called. 3 days of radio silence, and now he wanted to know if I'd learned my lesson. The sheer, unadulterated arrogance, the absolute belief that I would have crumpled, that I would be begging for his forgiveness. "Now, I'm glad you're willing to be rational about this," Mark was saying now from his chair, jolting me back to the present. He'd drunk about half his coffee, blissfully unaware of the legal and financial tidal wave I had waiting in a kitchen drawer. "Owen and I were thinking we could find a place for you in another department. Maybe as an accounting associate." Accounting associate. From co-founder and CFO to an entry-level position in the company I built. "That's very generous of you," I said, my voice as sweet as poison. "Should we talk about the terms?" Terms. Mark placed his mug on the side table, leaning forward, that negotiator's glint returning to his eyes. "I think you'll find our offer is more than fair, all things considered." "All things considered," I echoed, getting to my feet. "That's an interesting way to put it, Mark. Why don't I go change into something a bit more suitable for this negotiation?" I walked into our bedroom, leaving him to marinate in his smug confidence. My hands were steady as I pulled my best suit from the closet. The sharp, dark gray Armani I'd worn when we gave our Series B pitch. The suit that made me look like exactly what I was, a chief financial officer who knew her value down to the last cent. As I fastened the jacket, I could hear Mark's muffled voice from the living room. He was on the phone, likely giving Owen a triumphant update, telling him I was being rational. Let them have their fantasy for 5 more minutes. I walked back into the living room, no longer the grieving, discarded wife, but the woman who had helped build a $15 million company from nothing. Mark's eyes widened just a fraction. This was not the broken woman he was expecting. "Before we get to the terms," I said, walking calmly to the kitchen, "I think there are a few documents we need to review together." From the drawer, I pulled out the crisp stack of divorce papers, Veronica's elegant letterhead practically humming with legal authority. I placed them squarely on the coffee table, right in his line of sight. He couldn't ignore them. Next came my laptop, which I opened to Professor Finch's forensic analysis, and finally, 2 glasses and a bottle of 25-year-old single malt, the Scotch Mark reserved exclusively for celebrating major victories. "What is this?" Mark's voice had lost its confident tone. "It's called due diligence," I said, pouring the scotch with a steady hand. 2 fingers, neat. Just how he'd taught me to appreciate it. "You always said that, to have a successful negotiation, both parties need to operate with total transparency." I placed his glass next to him, then sat on the ottoman directly across from him, the very spot where he had knelt 5 years ago, offering me a ring and a lifetime of promises. Mark's gaze was fixed on the divorce papers. "Chloe, this is necessary," I finished for him. "But that's the boring part. This is where it gets interesting." I turned the laptop to face him. Professor Finch's spreadsheet filled the screen, 18 months of theft condensed into a series of undeniable columns and rows. "Horizon Strategies," I began, my voice cool and clinical, $50,000 a month. "Pinnacle Group," I continued, "another $50,000, same date of incorporation, same registered agent. Different bank, but the same signatory. That's..." Owen assured me these were legitimate contractors. Did he? In that case, I'm sure he won't mind providing the signed contracts, the service-level agreements, the detailed work logs. I clicked to the next tab, Apex Innovations. This one was special. $100,000 wired quarterly for strategic advisory. The mailing address they listed? It's a P.O. box in a strip mall. The color was draining from Mark's face. It was like watching a building being demolished in slow motion, each pillar of his denial crumbling one by one. $2.5 million, Mark, over 18 months, all while you were preparing to fire me for less than $10,000 in legitimate, pre-approved expenses. This can't be happening. Professor Finch verified every single transaction. You remember Professor Finch, right? You met him at our wedding. You told him how lucky you were to be marrying a woman who actually understood numbers. Mark snatched his glass of scotch and downed half of it in one gulp. His hand was visibly shaking. "But that's not all," I said, pulling up another file. "There's more. Veronica's private investigator. You remember Veronica Croft, the lawyer who dismantled Sterling Industries for securities fraud? She's representing me now. Anyway, her investigator found the most fascinating thing. The video file loaded. It was security footage from our office. The timestamp was clear, October 12th, 11:15 p.m., 2 days before my performance review." "That's Owen," I narrated, though it was unnecessary. "We watched his brother enter my office with his master key card, and that's my computer he's accessing. The footage showed Owen at my workstation for almost 45 minutes. The camera angle was good enough to see him insert a thumb drive, his fingers flying across my keyboard, clicking through my files with practiced ease. You presented me with falsified expense reports as evidence of my misconduct," I said. "Reports that Owen conveniently doctored on October 12th at 11:15 p.m. Mark slammed his glass down on the table. Yes, Owen wouldn't. He's my brother. He's your brother who has been systematically robbing our company blind while gaslighting you into firing the one person who was guaranteed to catch him." I pulled up my original expense reports, the ones from my sent email folder, and placed them side by side with the altered versions Owen had created. The changes were subtle, but utterly damning. A client dinner for $1,200 became $4,200. A software license for $3,000 became $13,000. He'd even added a non-existent first-class flight upgrade to my conference expenses. "Stop." Mark's voice was a choked whisper. "Stop it." Mark shot up from his chair and paced to the window, his reflection a pale, ghostly version of the titan of industry who had walked in an hour ago. "How long?" he asked, his back to me. "How long have you known?" 3 days. Professor Finch confirmed the fraud on Tuesday. Veronica's PI got the footage Tuesday night. Sarah Jenkins finished her article yesterday afternoon. Sarah Jenkins? The journalist. The one from the Denver Business Chronicle, investigating toxic workplaces. She found Owen's management style particularly illuminating. Did you know he's been taking credit for Sarah's financial models? Or that he tried to expense his girlfriend's spa weekend? Mark turned from the window, his face ashen. "I have to call Owen." "Go ahead," I said. "Ask him about Horizon Strategies. Ask him why he needed $2.5 million so desperately he was willing to destroy my career and our marriage. Ask him why he was so obsessed with becoming CEO of a company he was actively bankrupting." Mark pulled out his phone, his thumb hovering over Owen's contact. "You've recorded this, haven't you? This entire conversation?" "Of course I did." Mark stood frozen, his phone still in his hand, as if calling his brother could somehow reverse the avalanche of truth I had just unleashed. The Denver skyline was beginning to light up as evening fell, and I watched his reflection grapple with a reality he could no longer deny. "I need to go," he finally said, his voice hollow. "I need to think." "The divorce papers are on the table," I said softly. "Veronica's contact information is clipped to the front." He walked past the coffee table, hesitated, then picked up the documents with a hand that trembled. "You had this all planned out." "No, Mark. You planned this. You planned it the moment you chose to trust Owen's lies over my loyalty. I just planned my response." He left without another word. The heavy apartment door clicked shut, the sound final and absolute. Winston trotted out from the bedroom where he'd been hiding from the tension and pressed his big, furry body against my leg. "It's over, boy," I whispered, scratching behind his ears. Now, we wait. I didn't sleep that night. My mind was a whirlwind, replaying every possible scenario of what would come next. At 6:15 a.m., my phone exploded. It was a digital tidal wave of notifications, texts, emails, LinkedIn alerts, even a few pings from a Facebook account I hadn't touched in years. Sarah's article was live. The headline was a masterpiece of brutality. Vanguard Dynamics CEO fires wife to hide brother's $2.5 million embezzlement scheme. The subheading was even more damning. A story of fraud, nepotism, and a calculated betrayal at the top of Denver's tech scene. I opened the article, my fingers shaking. Sarah had woven a narrative that was both clinical and devastating. She had integrated Professor Finch's forensic report with scathing, on-the-record quotes from a dozen former employees, each one painting a vivid picture of Owen's incompetence and Mark's willful ignorance. One quote from a junior engineer stood out. "Chloe was the only exec who knew our names. Owen took credit for my code, and when I complained, Mark told me I needed to be a better team player." My phone rang. It was Veronica. "Good morning, sunshine," she chirped, sounding entirely too pleased for this early. "Ready for the main event?" "What main event? Emergency board meeting?" 8 a.m. Daniel Park called it last night after Sarah's article dropped. They're streaming it to the entire company for transparency. The irony is delicious. Can I watch? Already have the link. I'm in my office. Bring coffee, the good kind. I threw on jeans and a hoodie, leashed Winston, and made a stop at the bougie coffee shop Mark had always loved. One last time. The barista, a young guy who knew our usual orders, looked at me with wide, sympathetic eyes. "Mrs. Maxwell, I saw the news. I'm so sorry. Don't be," I said, taking the 2 lattes. "And from now on, just call me Chloe." Veronica's office had a commanding view of the city. Her paralegal, a sharp young woman, had the live stream set up on a massive monitor in the conference room. "This is better than reality TV," Veronica said, sipping her latte. "Daniel Park is apoplectic. Apparently, Mark never even informed him he was terminating you." The stream flickered to life at 8 a.m. sharp. The familiar conference room appeared on screen. Same table, same chairs, but the energy was toxic. Daniel Park, a man I'd always known to be calm and composed, looked like he was about to erupt. The other primary board member, a venture capitalist named Sandra Mills, looked equally furious. Mark sat in his usual spot, but his alpha dog posture had vanished. He looked small. Beside him, Owen was fidgeting, tugging at the collar of his $1,000 suit as if it were a noose. "Gentlemen," Daniel began, his voice ice cold, "would either of you care to explain why I had to learn about the termination of our CFO from a news publication?" "Daniel, it's a complicated situation," Mark began to stammer. "It's not complicated at all," Sandra cut in. "You terminated a co-founder and board observer without a proper vote. That is a flagrant violation of our corporate governance charter. She was engaging in financial misconduct," Owen blurted out, his voice cracking. Daniel held up a tablet. "According to this forensic analysis, the only misconduct was $2.5 million in fraudulent payments to shell corporations registered to you, Owen." The color drained from Owen's face. He looked like he was about to be physically ill. That's being taken out of context." "Really?" Sandra countered, pulling up her own laptop. "Horizon Strategies, Pinnacle Group, Apex Innovations. Would you care to share the contracts for these vendors? The work product? Any documentation at all?" Silence. "Furthermore," Daniel continued, "we've been made aware of 17 formal HR complaints filed against you, Owen, in the last 6 months. Complaints that you, Mark, failed to escalate to this board." My phone buzzed. It was my mom. "Are you watching this? Come home." Now, 20 minutes later, I was in my mom's kitchen, Winston at my feet as she served me a bowl of chicken soup, even though it was barely 9:30 a.m. "Em, you need to eat," she said, her expression firm. "Revenge is a marathon, not a sprint." "Mom, this isn't about revenge." She sat down across from me, her eyes the same shade of blue as mine, searching my face. "Your father's brother cheated him out of their business partnership. Did I ever tell you that?" I shook my head. They had a small construction company. Your uncle was billing clients for high-end materials and using cheap substitutes, pocketing the difference. When your father found out, your uncle convinced the whole family that your dad was just jealous. Your own grandparents sided with the thief. What did Dad do? He walked away. He started his own company from scratch on the other side of town, built it into something twice as big, twice as reputable. His brother's company went bankrupt within 3 years. She reached out and squeezed my hand. Your father's revenge wasn't in tearing his brother down. It was in building something better without him. I just wanted the truth to come out, Mom. Truth and revenge aren't always mutually exclusive, sweetheart. Sometimes they're the same thing, just with better PR. My phone buzzed again. It was a flood of texts from former colleagues. They suspended Mark and Owen. FBI is here. News vans everywhere. I ran to my mom's living room window. Even from her quiet suburban street, we could see the news helicopters circling the downtown skyline near the Vanguard Tower. We watched as employees streamed out of the building. Then, just after 11 a.m., it happened. The main doors of the Vanguard building swung open, and Owen emerged, flanked by 2 people in navy blue windbreakers with FBI written in bold yellow letters. His hands were cuffed behind his back. The press photographers swarmed. "How do you feel?" Mom asked, her arm around my shoulders. I watched as they guided Owen, a man whose arrogance had once seemed invincible, into the back of an unmarked car. His perfect hair was a mess, his face a mask of pure terror. Empty, I admitted. I thought I would feel victorious, vindicated, but I just feel hollow. Hollow is good, Mom said, pulling me closer. When you expect a standing ovation and all you feel is quiet, that's when you know you're on the right path. Winston whined at my feet, and I realized I had been clenching my fists. I looked at my phone. 43 missed calls from Mark, 4 from an unknown number which I knew was Owen, and a voicemail from Veronica, marked urgent. "I should go," I said, but Mom shook her head. "No. Listen to them. Listen to all of it. You need to hear exactly who he is when he's lost everything." I put the phone on speaker. Mark's first message left just after midnight. "Chloe, we need to handle this rationally. These are serious accusations, and I think we're both letting our emotions run high. Call me." The second, from 3 a.m. "I've been looking at the documents. There has to be a misunderstanding. Owen swears he can explain everything. Please, just talk to me." By message 20, around 5 a.m., his tone had changed completely. "You've ruined us. Do you understand that? The company, our name, everything we built together." Message 31, 7 a.m. "I'm sorry. God, Chloe, I'm so sorry. I let him get in my head. I wasn't thinking. Please, just call me." Message 43, left just 20 minutes ago. "I love you. I know I destroyed us, but I still love you. Please." Mom poured herself a cup of tea. "Notice," she said, "that he never apologized for firing you. He's only sorry he got caught." The unknown number's voicemail was Owen, his voice thin and reedy. "Chloe, it's Owen. They're holding me downtown. Listen, Mark forced me to do it. He said if I didn't help him push you out, he'd ruin me. I have proof. I have recordings. I can help you bury him if you help me make bail." I actually laughed. He's trying to flip on his own brother. My phone rang again. It was Veronica. "Perfect timing," she said. "Can you be downtown in 1 hour? The Sterling Group wants to meet with you." "The Sterling Group?" "A venture capital firm. They just pulled their $10 million funding round from Vanguard, and they want to discuss backing your next venture." "I don't have a next venture." "You will," she said after this meeting. The conference room at Sterling Ventures had panoramic views of the entire city. 3 people sat across a long table from me. Sarah Sterling, the firm's legendary founder, a younger partner named James, and Monica, a woman who'd built and sold 2 tech companies herself. "Ms. Maxwell," Sarah began, then corrected herself. "Chloe, we've been tracking the situation at Vanguard. You mean the implosion," I said. Monica smiled. "That's what we like about you. No corporate jargon. We withdrew our Series C funding this morning. James added. $8 million. But we don't want to lose our investment in your talent. Sarah leaned forward. The forensic accounting you did in 3 days was brilliant. Veronica Croft says you built an ironclad case from scratch. What's your point? We want to fund you, Monica said simply. Fraud detection and corporate governance consulting. Companies need someone who understands the numbers and the human element, someone who's been in the trenches. You want to fund my trauma? We want to fund your expertise, Sarah corrected. There's a difference. They laid out a plan, a new firm, built around my experience. They would provide $2 million in seed funding, office space, and access to their network of clients. Why would you trust me? I asked. My own husband just accused me of being a thief. Falsely accused, James clarified. Right after you uncovered his brother's actual theft. That's not a liability, Chloe. That's an origin story. My phone buzzed. A call from the county jail. I answered it. Chloe? It was Owen's desperate voice. Thank God. Listen, I know. Stop. Are you recording this conversation? A beat. No. Owen, you stole $2.5 million and you framed me. Mark told me to. He said you were getting too powerful, that you were going to push him out. He said if I helped him get rid of you, he'd make me the next CEO. And you fell for that? He's my brother, and I was his wife. How did that work out for me? A long silence. Then, I'll testify. I'll say it was all his idea, but it wasn't, was it? The shell companies, the offshore accounts. That was all you. Mark was just too weak and too arrogant to stop you. Another pause. How did you know? Because Mark isn't smart enough to pull off that kind of sophisticated fraud. He's a salesman with a vision. He doesn't have the patience for complex financial schemes. That has your fingerprints all over it. I can still help you. No, Owen. You can help yourself. Plead guilty and pray for a lighter sentence. Goodbye. I hung up the phone and felt nothing. No triumph, no anger, just a profound sense of exhaustion. 2 weeks passed in a blur of legal negotiations and strategy sessions with the Sterling Group. I was temporarily living in Sophie's guest room, unable to stomach the apartment and its ghosts. Winston had made himself at home, claiming her oversized armchair as his new throne. One evening, Mark showed up at Sophie's apartment building. The doorman called up, his voice uncertain. There's a Mr. Maxwell here. He says he has something of yours. I met Mark in the lobby. He looked gaunt, a shadow of his former self. His expensive suit was wrinkled. He was holding our wedding album. You left this, he said, his voice low, on purpose. Can we just talk? For 5 minutes? We sat on opposite ends of a cold, modern sofa in the lobby. I know you hate me, he started. I don't hate you, Mark. To hate you, I'd have to feel something. He visibly flinched. I deserve that. You deserve jail time, but it looks like Owen is taking the full hit for the fraud. I didn't know, Chloe. I swear, I didn't know about the money, but you knew it was wrong. You knew Owen was poison, and you still chose him. He opened the album to a photo of us at our reception, laughing, with a smudge of cake frosting on my nose. Did you ever even love me? He asked. I stared at the photograph. A lifetime ago. Love without trust is just a shared fantasy, Mark. We had the fantasy. We never had the trust. I stood up and walked away, leaving him in the lobby, hunched over the album of our dead marriage. The elevator doors closed, and for the first time I felt a sense of forward motion. Not closure, not satisfaction, just forward. 6 weeks later, I sat in a federal courtroom for the sentencing. Owen, in a standard-issue jumpsuit, looked small and terrified. He was sentenced to 5 years in federal prison for 18 counts of wire fraud and embezzlement. Then it was Mark's turn. He pleaded guilty to negligent oversight and breach of fiduciary duty, lesser charges. The judge gave him 2 years probation, 500 hours of community service, and a lifetime ban from serving as an officer or director of any publicly traded company. His identity, his entire world stripped away. As they led Owen out, his eyes met mine. He mouthed the word, "sorry," but I looked right through him. The next morning, I was in a conference room signing the final documents. With Sterling's backing, I had bought Mark's shares of the now toxic Vanguard Dynamics for pennies on the dollar. "Congratulations," Sarah said. "You now own 68% of what's left." My first act as majority owner was to rename the company, Phoenix Analytics. My second was to walk into my old office, throw out Owen's motivational posters, and open the windows to let the clean, rain-scented Denver air wash away the past. I kept only one thing, the napkin with our original business plan scribbled on it, a reminder of what we were and what ego had destroyed. I called a company-wide meeting. Everyone who was here before Owen's arrival gets to stay. Everyone who enabled him can see HR for their severance package. We are rebuilding with people who value integrity over influence. That afternoon, 18 people resigned. The 70 who remained were the true builders, the people who had done the real work while the brothers played at being kings. It wasn't revenge. It was a restoration. That night, in Sophie's guest room, I saw one last text from Mark. I lost everything. My thumb hovered over the reply button. I could have offered some kind of closure, some final word. Instead, I deleted it. Not out of spite, but out of the quiet realization that some chapters are over, long before the last page is turned. Winston nudged my hand and I scratched behind his ears. The opposite of love isn't hate, it's indifference. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt nothing for Mark at all. Tomorrow, I would walk into Phoenix Analytics and begin. 6 months later, we were thriving. We landed a major contract auditing a logistics giant, then a healthcare company. The Denver Business Journal gave me their Ethical Leadership Award. I reclaimed my maiden name, Blackwood. I saw Mark one last time, a year later, at a coffee shop. He was thinner, grayer, wearing a hoodie for some anonymous startup. He was a freelance coder now. Actually building things, he said, instead of just talking about it. He looked at me, at the successful woman I had become without him. "The company you built," he said. "That's what we were supposed to be." He walked out into the rain and I watched him go, a ghost from another life. That evening, I stood in my new office, overlooking the city, the lights twinkling like a field of stars. My assistant buzzed me. "Your call with the Tokyo team is in 5 minutes." We were going global. My tragedy had become my testimony. My pain had become a blueprint for prevention. I had built my empire not on lies, but on the unshakable foundation of truth. If this story of betrayal and ultimate payback had you on the edge of your seat, please hit that like button. My favorite part was when Chloe laid out the security footage for Mark, right after he'd arrogantly accepted a cup of coffee. What was your favorite moment of vindication? Let me know in the comments. And for more stories of justice and resilience, make sure you subscribe and ring that notification bell. You won't want to miss what's next. End of story.